Hello, everyone, and welcome to Geopolitics with Tyberius D. Today, we're going to be talking about the land on the edge of the earth, Pakistan. Now, why do I refer to that? We'll get into that in due time. But as far as what it is that basically in 1947 there was two major countries that came out of the Indian subcontinent, one being India and one being Pakistan. We talked about India in the last episode. There's going to be a lot of references to what we did in the last episode. This will be a shorter one. I apologize for that. However, India and Pakistan are basically tied at the hip. However, I consider India the actual superior senior partner there. Dare I take sides in that fight? But a nation of 1.3, 1.4 billion versus one that's 200? No, not even that. One that's 150 million? Yeah. I'm kind of giving weight to size here, right? So, without further ado, we're gonna talk about Pakistan. Radif, how you doing today? Thanks for being here.
I am doing okay. I got some fun stuff planned for later but Tyberius always comes first. Yeah, I was gonna probably see my girlfriend on her deathbed, but I guess Tyberius comes first.
That sounds creepy and horrible.
I'm joking. Just so everybody knows, I was supposed to go visit my girlfriend right now, but we can blame it on the blizzard. All right.
Fair enough. All right, so without further ado, what is the first question, which usually just it's history, right? We're doing the history of Pakistan.
Do you even want me to ask it?
Yeah, go for it. Ask it, and then we'll do that.
Right. So how did Pakistan enter the modern era?
All right, so big disclaimer here. We talked a lot about the history of the British Raj and India in the last episode, and that largely overlaps with this one. So if you want the real details, go watch the last episode. That was India. Easy to find. Do so. So what is different between the Indian history and Pakistan? Well, let's go back to 1946-47 when it's coming time to actually enter Pakistan, right? The long and the short here, and I'm going to be honest with a lot of folks here, my Pakistani history is a little spectacle, or is a little bit suspect. It's got some holes in it, and I apologize for that. I cannot remember the father of Pakistan's name, right? But at least from the general level, what I get is that you have a divide when the British openly say that they're going to leave the Indian subcontinent. And it was all supposed to be part of one unanimous super state. Mohammed Jinnah. Okay, yeah, that sounds right. Thank you for the chat.
Okay, cool.
Anyway, so from what I understand here is that it was supposed to be one massive super state. The entire British Raj was supposed to be part of that, outside of maybe Burma, which was largely not seen as part of the Raj, although it was connected to it. Anyway, the problem was the Islamic community within India itself did not feel that they were going to be treated well, and they were not going to have good relations with the Hindu majority of India. And they thought they were going to be a separate class. And basically, it ramps up into a civil war. And over the period of that is that it will kill at least 20 million people. So, anyway, the British will leave. They'll basically jump on a boat and take a hike. And the continent's largely left to itself. And while there is a provisional government that is kind of instilled with the British so they can kind of hit the ball running, it's largely torn apart by the Civil War. There will be mass migrations on a colossal scale. You'll see many, many people of the Islamic faith moving into the area that will be known as Pakistan. You'll see a lot of people leave from these areas that are Hindu that will go into what is now India. And it basically supercharges the division that we see to this very day. If you are a practicing Muslim in the Indian subcontinent, it's not really safe to be in India. They will target you. Vice versa for Pakistan. You can't really be Hindu there. And so you basically have the rise of sectarian religious states. However, India is a little bit more secular in that regard, but we can get into that at a later date. Anyway, as far as Pakistan,
your throat all right? Your throat all right?
I got a little drainage. The weather's horrible right now.
if you wanna get some water, I can talk a little bit.
No, it's good.
Okay, that's fine.
He's trying to take his show, take the show over again. I tell you.
No, 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 no. Geopolitics with I mean, sorry, geopolitics with Tiberius will be always geopolitics with
Uh huh.
Tiberius. Yeah.
Anywho, so as far as where we're at, is that this civil war will largely end around 1949, and it will basically draw upon, if you will, kind of like the battle lines. They don't get to where they want to be. Neither side gets what they want, but they basically call a ceasefire, and that is the status quo for about 20 years. After that point, we get into the three wars that India Pakistan will fight. India, I believe, will largely get the upper hand here, but it is absolutely a bloody death match, and it will not go. It won't go to anyone's true favor. Obviously, India doesn't have all of Kashmir, and Pakistan doesn't have all of Kashmir either, so no one's happy. The good news is, unironically, is that both sides got nuclear weapons about the same time. Now, why is this a good thing? Well, it lends a lot of argument to the concept of mutually assured destruction. Because if there was any groups of people that decided they wanted to use nuclear weapons in an armed conflict against each other, it would be India, Pakistan. And especially after the Cold War, the conversation was is that if nukes were going to ever be thrown, it would be those two nations that would do it in the modern era. So far, that's been pretty much not the case. And in fact, relations between India and Pakistan have kind of normalized. I'm not going to say they're great. I'm not going to say that they're any will to decent even. But the difference between what the cold blanket animosity that was seen in the 60s and 70s versus what's seen into the late 80s, early 90s, and even into the 2000s, it's a complete tone shift. And so they don't like each other, but they will tolerate each other, and they will actually like have a conversation, which is something they wouldn't do. Let's be Heston say that on a general level, this relationship is better, but it still has a lot of animosity toward it. But let's talk about something a little differently. Obviously, in about 2001, the world situation changed. And this is where I really want to focus this particular episode. Why is Pakistan on the edge of the world? It's a geographic thing. We're going to talk about this in the geographic section, but the history is built upon this. Pakistan is a very semi-arid area. Well, actually, we'll just cover that in the geography section. But long and short is, in 2001, there was a group of people that made themselves very, very famous, and we call these people the Taliban. Right? We also have a group of people that will hold them in Afghanistan, and I'm completely losing my mind on what the name of this is. The people who originally ran the Afghanistan, I cannot remember. But anyway, the problem with the western provinces of Pakistan is it basically has the exact same geography that Afghanistan does to a large degree, and I'm going to make so many comparisons. We'll just talk about this in geography. But Pakistan can't control these areas, the western areas. They cannot get a formal civilizational foothold here. It's literally like one place is control the area, and like a modern nation state, while the place right next door is literally the edge of the world, and you can't hold it down. This is the lands of the Hindu Kush. This is the lands that Alexander passed through to get to India. Everyone knows this is where empires have kind of gone to die. Whether you talk about, this is the place where the Mughals eventually came from. This is the place where Tamerlane came out of. Either bad things come out of this region, and nothing good going in ever comes back out. The British fought 4 wars here. It's just, it sucks. But anyway, as far as the general level is that the entire relationship of the last 20 years for Pakistan, for the rest of the world, is figuring out what they're going to do with these people who have fled from Afghanistan, who have literally millions of people. Thank you for the follow on Twitch. Anyway, they have millions of people in what is basically refugee camps that have kind of sifted into the Pakistani population now. But due to basically an ever-torn war zone, they don't know how to police this region, and bad things keep spewing out of it that really diminishes Pakistan's standing globally. I mean, this actually goes back to the 80s during the Soviet invasion, but anyway, we're we'll see where this goes. But that's generally their history. I'm gonna really tag this in
Oh,
geography, but yeah, go ahead.
I, I have. The good news is I was pretty light on the history
It
section,
is. It is.
but I actually do have a few counter questions. So,
Go
you
ahead.
actually brought up a few things. You brought up something. Actually, you didn't bring up the Poppy War. If you could repeat the Poppy Wars, considering the Poppy Wars actually had a bigger effect on Pakistan than India, then that'd be great.
Sure. A little bit out of my knowledge base, but from what I understand is that when the British originally came into the Indian subcontinent, they had a problem with opium. They Most of the opium still to this day comes out of Afghanistan and the western provinces of Pakistan. It's really good for growing poppies. I don't know why. I need to look into that because it doesn't fucking rain. But anyway, it grows there. This is where it's really easy to control. And the British tried to come in, or from my understanding, they tried to come in and exterminate the place. Just like, all right, we got to get rid of these drugs. We got to clean house. Failed to kind of do that. Well, and if they that at least from my understanding, that is the Poppy War. Now, flip that over. We talked about the Opium Wars in the last episode. They figured out if you can't beat them, join them, and so they started taking all these poppies and all this opium, and they became the world's largest drug supplier. Um,
Mm,
so that's that in a nutshell. And yes, um, it does particularly fold into Pakistan. However, I'm going to admit my a bit of my knowledge base here in saying that I don't know the exact specifics on that, and maybe I should work on that.
okay. Um, just tell me if you know this or not.
Go for it.
On the topic of drugs, we when we talk about Pakistan,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the reason why we see marijuana being a large export from Pakistan is because the U.S. actually helped grow them because they'd rather have them grow marijuana than cotton. Because if they grew cotton, that would be in um, direct competition with American farmers. Could you please highlight the effects that the United States intervention with the Taliban has had on Pakistan?
Okay, two things here because you got into two completely different things. Cotton is actually something I can't go into to a large detail, and this is way older than what people think it is. Back during the 1700s, cotton was a crash crop because you could grow it. It was the big textile thing at the time, and there wasn't a lot of places to really grow good cotton in most of Europe. Actually, the biggest place that grew cotton in all of Europe was Normandy, and that only goes so far. Um, the British really liked the Americas, particularly the southern states, because it was great for cotton. But the problem is, by the time that cotton really got to become any kind of a major crash crop, the United States had actually left and became its own nation, and the British lost their primary commodity gains. Now, the British and Americans did trade, but the Americans actually turned that into their own industrial footprint, which will be the American Northeast, where they'll basically the agricultural South. This is how we get the whole slavery conflagration and shit. Is that you have agriculture in the South, which is large cotton and cash crops. They'll go to the North, they'll process them into finished goods like clothing, ship them off to Europe. And this was actually a major economic boom for the United States. Why do I mention this? This is literally on the opposite side of the world. India is actually a place you can grow a shitload of cotton. And the British made a big effort into the entire subcontinent, particularly the East India Company when it ran it, to, if you will, cottonize the Indian agriculture. They had some success, they had some failures here, but cotton can grow in some places that you wouldn't expect. It's actually not a very water intensive crop. It can grow in some more semi arid areas. And so, one of the big things at least that I've seen from the data I have, is that more of central India up in the highlands actually became pretty prominent in growing cotton, particularly around Hyderabad. Now, might be wrong on this one. I haven't looked over this data in a couple years, actually. And I always got to recheck my stuff. But Pakistan is actually really well suited for cotton. And so there was definitely a push by the British to do that. I don't know how successful it was. You can definitely grow cotton in the hills. You can ship it down to the Indus River and get it the hell out. Although we go back to that problem that we talked about in the Indian episode, where because of the monsoons, it's really, really hard to keep shipping constant on those major rivers. You have to get very small rafts. So, without further ado, that's cotton. Now, as far as marijuana, I can't speak to that. I know a lot of it. A lot of the chatter is largely just around poppies, opium, heroin. Um, so I
Mhm.
can't speak around that. As far as the Taliban and the basically the relations with the United States, there is that we went into. Are you? I'm
Shut up!
sorry, that's
Don't read it.
chat.
Don't read it. Just
I did. I couldn't help it.
don't read it.
Anyway, as far as the Taliban, they have had control or helped controlled most of Afghanistan, but they also more matter of fact controlled the western provinces of Afghanistan. They had the infrastructure, they had the organized networks to do so.
You mean the Eastern?
No, western. No. Western
They
Pakistan.
they, they can they controlled but you said Western Afghanistan.
Sorry, I misspoke. Western Pakistan. No, they control most of Afghan. They control pretty much all of Afghanistan, particularly eastern Afghanistan, and then most of western Pakistan. That's the border province. Um, so anyway, getting into that, they largely control that. The Americans basically tried to come in after September 11th and bomb the hell out of them. We were literally there that night. The problem with this is that they didn't succeed, and they, believe it or not, now the American government in the last year has openly negotiated with the Taliban and largely have given back Afghanistan and most of these places that they have been fighting over for 20 years. Weird how that works. Um, but anyway, as far as where this goes, um, the the Taliban's relationship with the rest of the world is spicy because they don't operate like a normal nation state. They're more of a terror network. That's a legit criticism of that. However, they're kind of falling into the trap that I've outlined with terrorism, is that these places are now becoming such a vacuum of power that they have to rule themselves, and it's really putting a hindrance on how the Taliban operates. You may have noticed that they're not really that famous for doing. Um, you may have noticed that they're just not that famous for doing major terrorist attacks anymore. They're too busy stuck ruling. A lot of what we're seeing now is more of ISIS, Hezbollah, which Hezbollah's even had to tone down their crap because they're trying to rule Lebanon. The Muslim Brotherhood, that kind of thing, is just basically anybody who actually has any kind of political land foot is now being forced to actually rule, and it's putting a lot of um, pressure on them to actually perform acts of governments instead of acts of terrorism. And they're falling into that trap because they have to. So I would expect that you're going to see a lot less terrorism, if you will, and a lot less problems coming out of West Pakistan and a lot out of Afghanistan. There is no central governing authority to actually be in control of this. It's all so weak that basically they have to have an interim alliance. And so if they're not fighting each other, they're barely holding it together. Go ahead, Radif.
Okay. I'm actually going to reiterate that point.
Mm-hmm.
Since you did talk a lot there, why don't we talk about how how uh, as somebody who doesn't know a lot, right? I'm not gonna hide and say, I don't know a lot about Pakistan. I mean, I'm obviously not an expert. Well, my question to you is, how did Osama bin Laden end up hiding in Pakistan? If you could please highlight that, if you
Ooh, I was
if you
wanting to talk about
know.
this. All right, yeah, I want to double
Cool.
check this real quick just so I don't feel like I'm talking completely out of my butt here.
Go for it. I can distract it with
I just want to make
um
sure I've got the location right, right?
okay.
So the Kuwait, or I'm sorry, the Osama bin Laden's compound is, if I remember correctly, literally in downtown Islamabad. Um,
It's still closed to this day. You can't get in. You can't even get in a 3 block radius of it. It's crazy.
I
But
believe it.
yeah.
I'm just trying to make sure that I've got that.
And then after this, you want to talk about how the Pakistan government uh, how they treated the United States after they killed Osama bin Laden. If you want to talk about the United States and Pakistani relationships after Osama bin Laden was killed.
Okay, so I want to go back real quick to talking about like Bin Laden, but
Yeah,
then we
yeah,
can
yeah.
get in there.
Yeah.
So where Bin Laden was killed, I want to make sure. Like they're Pakistan's a little weird, and it doesn't operate in the same way that like we Westerners are used to. Basically, you'll have a urban or semi-urban core that um, this region operates out of, and then they literally just the hill next door could be the hill next door will literally be almost like the edge of the world. It will not be controlled by any real institutional government. And this is Pakistan in a nutshell. And I really want to talk about this in geography. But it's really easy to slip in and out of here. You know, Pakistan has a police state, don't get me wrong. They've got literally have secret police, but they also have their borders are so porous you can literally just stroll on in. And if you just belong in the region, no one would bat an eye. So the long and the short here is that how does Bin Laden get in to the dense urban core? Well, basically, just walks right on in, and he's got numerous supporters. There are Islamic radicals within the Pakistani government who probably were funding some of his efforts. Let's not be wrong here. And also, the dude was loaded, right? He is literally a Saudi royal prince, not the top Saudi royal prince, but the Bin Laden family is not poor by any stretch of the imagination, right? So the long,
they're in those holy bucks.
yeah. So anyway, the long and the short here, at least for what we're seeing here, is that this guy's loaded. He can easily buy off favors. Pakistan isn't setting the world's records for anti-corruption anytime soon, and so the long and the short, at least for what I'm looking at, is that Bin Laden easily could hide out in Pakistan, and so he did. And it made sense because he hid out in the area where the Pakistani government could not avoid reciprocity for an American action. And it's kind of amazing that when Bin Laden was killed, that Pakistan literally didn't throw the wrench at the United States, because they could have, and they probably should have. And that was supposed to be part of Bin Laden's gambit. I think I think the realization here was that the Pakistani government didn't jump the gun on it because they realized that they were kind of being played for. And so here we are. Going into, what was the second part here? I forgot. You asked me another, like a sub question or something else on that relative line.
You want me to remind you? Or,
Yeah, go ahead. I forgot where else we were
kind of, I actually kind of just touched on it. It was my follow up was how did this affect U.S. Pakistani relations?
Oh yeah, okay. So just as the follow up, U.S. Pakistan relationships have always been strained because these are two countries that really don't agree on jack crap, but geopolitical interests keep pushing them back together again. So let's rewind back to the 80s. During the 80s, the Soviets were invading Afghanistan. Pakistan's right next door, and there was Soviet incursion flights into Pakistani airspace. Pakistan was kind of pissed. And even though being part of the more eastern bloc of nations, as Pakistan was, Pakistan did have open chats with the United States. There was a deal about buying F-16s. However, we didn't give them the radar they needed to shoot down helicopters, which was pissing off Pakistan. There's a long and a short here as well. But at least from what I understand, what I do know is that the United States and Pakistan have had a very touch and go relationship. Sometimes they see that there is something that they have to work on together, and they'll actually put aside their differences to do it. But more often than not, it gets in the way too much, and they don't get anything constructive to happen. This could be as beneficial as Charlie Wilson's War, where basically we funnel a bunch of weapons through Pakistan to Afghanistan to blow up Soviet helicopters and Soviet IFVs and whatever. But then it's back to the 90s, where literally they're like, dude, you just tomahawked, you just sent tomahawk missiles through our country to bomb another country. And so they don't really care for us. And then you flip that back over to after 9/11, they're like, all right, Taliban's making us look bad. They're making you look bad. You're mad at them. We'll let you have access so you can go bomb the crap out of them.
Right.
It's largely really this repeating pattern, touch and go, touch and go, touch and go. The Bin Laden one's actually the one where I thought it was going to go the other way. Granted, I wasn't a super expert compared. I'm sorry, I'm not even an expert now, but I was not anywhere in the expertise level back in 2011 when this happened to really comment on it. But the um, the real issue I have here um, is that I need to stop reading chat. Is the real fucking issue I have here? Um,
Yeah, don't
the
worry.
real yeah
I'll interact with them.
yeah the real issue here is that excuse me.
I got it. Don't worry.
Yeah, I know. I'm about to stroke. Anyway. I
Cool.
completely lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, the real issue here is that Pakistan probably would have gone the other way on any other level when it came to the bombing of or when it came to the killing of Osama bin Laden, because this was downtown Pakistan, if you will, right? And the whole issue here is that they have to like stand up and save face here, and they just don't. And I'm kind of glad that Pakistan largely let it go. They bitched and they complained about it. Don't get me wrong, but when it came down to it, they knew what was up. They knew fucking excuse me. They knew that Bin Laden was probably playing them for security, and the fact that the Americans just said to hell with it anyway. Ballsy move from Barack Obama. Don't let anyone say that or that he wasn't. But on the other hand, yeah, this was an absolute breach of sovereign territory, and it's amazing it didn't go the other way. So I'm sorry to reiterate myself, but yeah, this is something else. Anyway, do we want to do geography real quick because we need to get moving on with this?
No, we don't. We only spent like 20 minutes.
We are at 27 minutes.
It's still out of like an hour or so. I think we're chilling.
Yeah, we're gonna have to close out a little early. We've got the left wing panel tonight, but anyway, let's not.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry. I didn't know.
That's fine. Let's not drown out the podcast. All right,
Well,
let's do.
Why don't we talk about one last thing?
All right,
okay?
fine.
When we talk about India, I could ask you a question about corruption in India. But why don't I talk about infrastructure? Because there happens to be a large issue with a lot of people who are even in Islamabad, right, aren't even getting enough water. So if you could talk about maybe their hydration issues, what's going on with that, their sanitation and all that. If you could touch on that. If not, then I can ask you a different question.
Reword that because I lost my train of thought there for a second.
It's okay. It's all right. I can see you got other things. I was going to ask you about hydration and about water and how most people, even within the major cities, are facing water shortages, massive water shortages. So if you could touch on why Pakistan is having such a large problem with getting fresh water to its communities, then that'd be great.
Oh, okay, sure. This largely goes into geography anyway.
Yeah,
so
why can't we? Yeah, let's transition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Answer that question first.
All right, cool. So we can start with that. So just going into the geography section, we talked about this largely with the India episode, is that where India is largely hit with a monsoon, most of Pakistan is not. Or if they do, they get the prevailing outlier of this. And the reason for this is that the monsoon largely sweeps over the subcontinent and basically blows from one side of the Indian Ocean to the other of it, and then just goes over the giant tip. Now, a lot of these winds will get pushed into the Himalayas, and then it will rain there, but that flows down through the river systems. It's kind of like the Nile, or at least for the Indus River. Semi-arid area that you have a major river go flowing through. And so it will flood during the monsoon season, but the rest of the year it'll be largely arid. If you look at a satellite map, it's very rarely ever green in Pakistan, or at least most of Pakistan. Now, obviously, the more eastern you go into Pakistan, the better it is. That's not a definitive, though. Most of the entire region in Western India and pretty much most of Pakistan is at least some level of arid.
I have a slight question. Does that have anything to do with Chinese damming?
No. And if anything, China damming anything that would go into Pakistan would largely piss off Pakistan. which is something the Chinese cannot afford to do. And so, as far as I'm aware, it's all targeted at India right now. So,
Okay. All right. Cool. Cool. Cool.
anyway, so going the other side of this is that the real issue here is that it's something I don't remember Pakistan's actual population. I am so terribly sorry. Let me look at that real quick just to make sure. Because yeah, I'm a little out of the depth. I should have studied this. 216 million. So yeah, it's second most populous Islamic country. Fantastic. Um, the the problem with this is that it's 200 million people in the size of something on the order of California. So basically it's like Japan, but even more populated. The the
With a
issue
lower
here,
GDP.
yeah, the issue here is that the geography isn't that good, and so everyone's kind of hemmed in and into a very concentrated urban core, and then everything else is outside of that.
Right. You have a lot of non-state spaces.
Yeah. So
Uh,
the real problem is that it's made worse. Where like a lot of Japan gets a lot of water, most of Pakistan does not, and so it's really hard to make something green there. And so it's kind of like a repeat. It's like a mix of what we see with Japan, and it's like a mix of what we see with Egypt. It has like the Japan valleys, but it doesn't rain as much, and so they have to do the Egyptian thing where they have to irrigate everything from the Indus. That's Pakistan in a nutshell. Keep in mind they import over 50% of their calories right now. So if that was ever cut off, or we ever see the world coming in, which we'll talk about this in the future, is that Pakistan will probably starve to death. So let's move into geography writ large. The geography that empowers Pakistan really doesn't empower it; actually hurts it. We talked about the general overarching thing. It's a semi-arid desert. Most of it is largely built upon the Indus River Valley, which kind of sucks. Talked about how it was a lot like Egypt. Let's talk about the difference between Eastern Pakistan and Western Pakistan. Eastern Pakistan's a little bit more flatter. There's a lot of hills, don't get me wrong, but it's not what we would consider mountainous. And that's a real big deal here, is that Eastern Pakistan has some hills, and it has like these basins of power where you have cities and urban centers built out. But in Western Pakistan, it's largely mountainous, and it's really hard for people to get in there. A great example of this is there's some old prerogative here. Mountainous peoples always tend to be very persnickety. They're very, very hard to drive out. And when it comes to how these operate, it's the very same thing. Pakistan really can't go out and touch them without serious, serious manpower and investment, and they just can't afford that. They don't have the capital generation from the Indus River, so they can't build out roads and infrastructure that goes into the mountains, like just say maybe Mexico or the United States can. But they have to deal with it, and so they need to walk it away. As far as where we're at now, I want to put the geography in context here. A lot of the geography that we see in Pakistan is very, very similar to northern Mexico. Is that it is either mountainous and arid, or like hilly and arid with strong central urban cores. Think of what is it? I completely drew a blank. I don't know what's wrong with me today. I apologize. It might be the fact that I'm going to be doing a liberal panel today here before too long, which just makes
you
it
normally
worse.
like this, ladies and gentlemen. You just have to give Tiberius a little bit of time for him to process different
Thanks,
things. Like
thanks. Yeah, I was, I
geography.
was, I was going to talk about Monterey. There's certain sections of Pakistan that look a little better. Monterey's like on this area where it gets quite a bit wetter. Don't get me wrong, but you have areas where you have like a dense urban core, and the rest of it just kind of sucks. That, to a large degree, is Pakistan, and has a lot of central things here. The only areas that I really want to point out here that are quite different is that if you look at it on a more satellite map, everything around the Indus River is largely green. Everything on the western side of Pakistan is literally just rolling hills and mountains and crap. But it's largely more flat planed, and then when you get into areas like Islamabad, Lahore, it's not terrible. Remind you that Lahore, which is a very, very powerful part of, I had to bring up a map. This helps me so much better. Is very, very powerful part of Pakistan. Is literally just about
Sure,
an
it
hour.
does.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not going with my head on this one. I just can't do it. Anyway, Lahore is literally an hour from Amritsar, which is the capital of the Punjab, and this is a major place within within India itself. Uh, these places are quite a bit more greener. They're quite a bit flatter. They tend to work out better. Islamabad's up more towards the mountainous areas, but yes, go ahead.
Okay, that's cool. That was a nice job.
I just salvaged myself. It's terrible.
So, what you did bring up is that what I was trying to hint you on is that there's a lot of non-state spaces, and like the area between Afghanistan and Pakistan is pretty much impossible to trade in. They can't even build any like real infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was trying to kind of cue in. But off topic, let's talk about the future of Pakistan and what I actually want to. I mean, I guess I can talk about the main question which we have outlined, which is what do you see as the future of Pakistan? And then after that, I'm going to ask one follow up, and then we can close it out.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I jumped through the. Excuse me. We jumped definitely quickly through the geography section, but it's not. The state's actually not that big. But anyway, as far as the future of Pakistan, doesn't look good in any way, shape, or form. One of the big things we're realizing is that it kind of needs a foreign sponsor to keep it aloft. Right now, that's China. And if China continues to grow, you may see a surgence in Pakistan power or a Pakistani power. But the problem here is that China really doesn't have any interest in doing this to a large degree, and they've been very hands-offy when it comes to Pakistan compared to Afghanistan, actually, when it comes to building the new Silk Road. Basically, every path that they would want to go through Pakistan also has to go through India. And so they said to hell with that. The Americans really never wanted to show up into a big way in Pakistan, so they didn't really touch it outside of getting exactly what they wanted. The former Soviet Union never really cared too much about Pakistan. They were always more concerned with keeping India in their sphere of influence, so they didn't really get in that knife fight. The long and the short here is that basically Pakistan is at the mercy of everyone else not to kill it. And right now, the only thing that's keeping it alive is largely the fact that it's allied with China against India. If for any reason that would ever change, you could probably expect to see the end of Pakistan. Now, I'm going to make a hot take here, but in a world that is neo-imperial, in a world that shipments of food and shipments of agricultural commodities and energy is nowhere near as abundant, you could probably see the end of Pakistan. Pakistan does import something on the order of at least 30% of its calories, if not more. I have to double check the math on that. It's been a bit. Even with all the agriculture they have off the Indus River, it's overpopulated. It's not the Ganges River basin. It's more like Japan, where Japan has to import a lot of stuff. In the event that Pakistan has to worry about where the next meal comes from, you will probably see the end of Pakistan in a major way. It'll become civil strife and rioting, and basically what is the Taliban in Afghanistan, you'll probably see become the majority of Pakistan as well, even in these large urban centers. Like except where it's the hill peoples, it will be an actual urban civil strife. It will be people who don't have food, torching the place. That's happened before in history. Let's not pretend like this. And this actually tends to happen in this region quite a bit as well. Dare I say the Harappan Empire, which is one of the first civilizations in human history. Largely, it looks like they ran out of food. And because of that, it was a climate change disaster, let's be honest here. Their civilization went in decline, and they basically just evaporated into the dust. We could probably and very likely see that to Pakistan again, and I'm expecting probably, if China goes to crap, that come after the 2030s, but sometime in the 2030s, we will see the end of Pakistan. It will probably go into civilizational breakdown. The question is, will they decide that they want to become part of India, or will it break into civil states that can't do anything? India is going to have a word about that. Let's just not play games here. The other side of this is that will these people unite against India and maintain like a lineage of Pakistan? That's very possible. So that might be the only thing holding it together at all. I don't expect the future of India or the Pakistan to be that bright. India looks like they can hold itself together, but I'm going to make the hot take of the century here. If Pakistan doesn't join India, they will probably cease to exist within the next 20 years. So,
Okay. Why don't we talk about something that has been on our minds, and is probably the most likely thing to happen within the next maybe 3 years that might become an actual invasion. In the case that China and India go to war, what do you see Pakistan doing? What do you see what role do you think Pakistan would play? And if you could, if it's like multiple thing, if you see multiple paths that Pakistan could take, why don't you lead me through that, and then we can close out for the night.
Absolutely. This is a wonderful closeout too. This actually would be the best conversation piece of this episode by
Yeah,
far.
I mean
So
that's why I asked it.
yeah,
'Cause
no, I'm glad you did. So let's start with this. Okay, let's assume within the next 18 months, which is probably the more likely, that India and China actively get into a shooting match because the skirmish we had before probably isn't going to be the only one. The tensions are
oh
raising
yeah, there's
rapidly.
still skirmishes today.
Yeah,
So
the the tensions are rising rapidly, and it could come into a shooting match. Here's the real thing about this. India and China are largely bordered by the Himalayan mountains. You have to get through there, and so there's only a mountain pass here or a general area here that you can pass through of, and it's a killing field. Basically, as soon as you see a whole armored column come through, you send in your air force and you largely just bomb the living crap out of it, or you artillery the place.
yeah,
And so it really favors the defender. It's really hard to punch through. And so any kind of major conceded effort from either side is very easy to block by the other. So don't expect any kind of major ground to be had here unless one of these militaries prove to be exuberantly competent. Um, Points here. I think India is actually more competent than China, but we'll talk about that later. Um, Here's the problem with Pakistan. Pakistan doesn't have that shield. And so if Pakistan openly engages in a fight, that means that they're right in each other's face. Remember Lahore and Amritsar being an hour apart? That's a flat plain right at each other's face. That's where artillery and tanks and everything can move around at will. There is very little calculus here that I personally can see where Pakistan gains by opening up a conflict and joining the Chinese side here. There's way too much risk. There's way too much chances that there's going to be way too much civilian casualties, that there's going to be way too much economic damage, and just the fact that nuclear weapons could be thrown because it would matter is something that neither of these governments are going to take lightly. India Pakistan opening up would literally be total war on day one. It would
you
not
don't
be
think
pretty.
Pakistan will join China?
Here's the real calculus here, and this is what I'm trying to iterate: is that does it make sense for them to do so? And I would argue no. China can try to push into India. I don't think they physically can. India can just muster enough of a response that
I mean,
they can corner them. In the
okay.
same way that if India tried to push through, China could do the same on their side of the mountains. The long and the short here is that Pakistan doesn't have that border situation with India, and so if the shells start flying between India and Pakistan, it's right in each other's faces. There's no borders there that you get to hunker down behind and defend yourself when. It's literally just you're going to have armored columns moving at each other and going for flanking maneuvers at 0 hour.
Yeah, I've heard it be compared to like Poland, how good the tank terrain there is.
It's actually very similar to North Africa, but way bigger.
Oh, all right.
Yeah,
I mean,
like the thing that made
yeah.
Erwin Rommel famous, you can do at the Pakistan-India border a lot. So yes, go ahead.
So, I guess this is a closing thought.
Mm-hmm.
So we're hear it now from Tiberius that if India if India and China, which they might go to war, considering that China took the Galawan Valley and they took some serious borders, last spring, we hear it here that Tiberius finds it unlikely that Pakistan will join in.
Unironically, yes, I will actually side with that.
Okay.
I think if that actually comes to blows, Pakistan's going to try to sit it out because it's a lot more of a threat to Pakistan than it is to India.
All right. Well, I think that's a good closer. We have how long did we take there?
We are at 45 minutes. So
That's perfect. That's just a nice length. Considering that you've posted a decent amount this week, I think that's good.
Anyway, I want to thank everyone for being here. I've been Tyberius D. We've been joined by Radif. If you do like Radif, let me know. If you want some other co-hosts, let me know as well.
Shut your mouth. Shut it.
No, Radif's actually really good on helping me out on timing. He's basically available whenever I need him. But he definitely presses me, and we get to find out what I know and what I don't know. So I do thank him for that. So I got to up my game, boys. Got to up it real good. Anyway, on the Twitch, we've been having a lot of calls to reboot the talk show. I'm not a big fan of the talk show, but
Tiberius, can you look at the chat, please?
I see it. Anyway,
That's not me. That's not me, by the way.
I know it's not. Anyway, just to close out this episode, I've been Tyberius D. If you like what we do, come contact me on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, that sort of thing. Come watch the show. We'd appreciate it. And we're in the process of talking about maybe doing something else on Twitch, to kind of rebooting everything what we were doing. We'll see what happens, but until further notice, I've been Tyberius D, signing off.